The sun hit the mirrored face of Vanguard Tower like it was blessing the rich. 90 stories of glass and ego rising over San Francisco's skyline, the kind of building that didn't just scrape clouds, it owned them. Inside, the lobby buzzed with designer suits, security earpieces, and the click of ambition on marble floors. Cameras lined the entrance, waiting for the power pair who were about to redefine the future, or destroy it. At the top floor, a press conference was moments away. The deal, a $64 billion merger between Everhart Industries and Novosphere Energy. One, an empire built on oil and legacy. The other, a revolution in clean technology founded by a woman who'd had to fight for a seat at every table. Dr. Selena Brooks stepped out of the elevator like she'd been born for the light. Her charcoal gray suit carried quiet strength. Her eyes were steady, observant, never hurried. No entourage, no theatrics, just grace that didn't ask permission. She moved through a corridor filled with the sort of glances that weighed and measured, the kind that asked silently, "How did she get here?" Richard Everhart was already waiting in the conference hall, surrounded by men who laughed too loudly and assistants who spoke in half-whispers. The cameras adored him, tall, charming, the kind of man Fortune magazine called visionary. His smile held the confidence of someone who'd never been told no and didn't expect to start now. When Selena approached the podium beside him, he leaned toward her microphone and said, just loud enough for her to hear, "Try to keep it short. Investors like clarity." She gave a small nod, the kind that looked polite but meant, "You have no idea who you're speaking to." The cameras flashed as Richard began, his voice polished from years of interviews. Today, Everhart Industries proudly partners with Novosphere to reshape the future of sustainable energy. Applause followed, and when it faded, Selena began her speech, only for him to interrupt 3 sentences in. "That's a great point, Selena," he cut in smoothly, gesturing to the reporters. "What she means to say is..." She didn't correct him. Not yet. Her expression didn't change, but her silence was sharp enough to slice the air between them. Every journalist in that room noticed. For the next 20 minutes, Richard turned every insight she offered into a performance for the cameras. He laughed at his own jokes, repeated her statistics as if they were his discoveries, and ended each sentence with a glance toward the crowd for validation. And yet, Selena stayed still. Hands folded, gaze forward, not blinking. Every attempt to diminish her made her presence louder. By the time the press conference neared its end, the energy in the room had shifted. The audience wasn't entirely sure who the star was anymore. Richard's voice began to tremble at the edges of confidence. Selena finally took the microphone again and said, "Innovation doesn't belong to those who inherit power. It belongs to those who create it." The hall went silent. Cameras froze mid-flash. For a split second, even Richard's practiced smile faltered. She stepped away from the podium. The flashbulbs erupted again, this time not for him, but for her. Her expression was unreadable, like she was already 10 steps ahead of everyone else in that room. Somewhere among the applause and murmurs, Richard's jaw tightened. He forced a laugh, but it came out hollow. What he didn't know, what no one in that hall knew, was that the woman he had just tried to belittle held every piece of the deal in her hands. And she was about to decide how much his empire was really worth. If you're already drawn in by how this began, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button and tell us in the comments what country you're watching from. Because what happens next inside that tower will shake the foundations of power itself. The next morning, the gleaming glass boardroom on the 47th floor of Vanguard Tower smelled faintly of espresso, money, and something else: control. The merger meeting was about to begin. Around the long table sat 12 men and 2 women, all in navy suits that looked more like armor than fabric. Every nameplate shone except one, Selena's. Hers had been set an inch off-center, a small detail that said more than any word could. Richard Everhart entered last, flanked by 2 vice presidents who carried tablets and the smugness of people who believed they were irreplaceable. "Morning, team," he said, dropping his leather folder onto the table with theatrical ease. His gaze skimmed past Selena like she was part of the decor. "Let's start with introductions," he announced. "Serena. Oh, sorry, Selena, right?" The correction dripped with mock sincerity. He smirked, waiting for laughter. A few of his executives obliged. Selena didn't smile. Dr. Brooks is fine, she said evenly. Founder and Chief Executive Officer, Novasphere Energy. Her tone wasn't confrontational, just factual. That was what made it sting. Richard leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Right, Dr. Brooks, of course. Always impressive to see an academic make it this far into real business. A few heads tilted. One of his analysts whispered something under his breath. Another chuckled behind his coffee cup. The sound echoed around the table like the scraping of glass. Selena clicked her tablet open, projecting a slide deck onto the wall. Novasphere's grid technology has reduced production costs by 43% in 3 years. With adequate capital, we can reach carbon neutrality across 50 cities by 2032. Richard interrupted, waving his hand. Actually, I believe your numbers might be off. My team ran the projections yesterday. He tapped his assistant's arm. Didn't we find a discrepancy in the, carbon thing? The assistant scrolled nervously. Sir, those were Dr. Brooks' numbers. Our model used her data. A brief silence stretched. Richard cleared his throat. Well, the models differ slightly. Let's not get lost in the details. Selena's expression didn't move. She advanced the next slide. The details are the deal, Mr. Everhart. That's why I'm here. A few people shifted uncomfortably. The power dynamic flickered. Richard chuckled as if to smooth the tension. No need to get worked up. We're all on the same team here. Across the table, one of his deputies, Greg Palmer, Senior Vice President of Marketing, leaned back and muttered, "She's emotional." The word hung in the air like static. Selena turned her head slowly toward him. "Passion built the product you're trying to buy," she said. "If that makes you uncomfortable, perhaps your company's problem isn't the market, it's leadership." The silence that followed was so sharp, even the air conditioning seemed to pause. Greg flushed. Richard forced a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "All right, folks, let's keep this productive." Selena continued her presentation, her voice calm, her slides precise. Every interruption became a mirror, showing them their own arrogance. They laughed less with each one. When she finished, the only sound was the faint hum of the projector. She turned it off, closed her tablet, and said, "You've asked for innovation. I've shown you transformation. What remains is whether your board can recognize progress when it doesn't look like you." No one spoke. Even Richard's assistant avoided eye contact. Richard exhaled through his nose. Strong words. "But we're here to make this work, right?" He forced a laugh again, though his jaw tightened. "We'll review your terms and send over revisions." Selena nodded once, then gathered her folder. "Do that. My team will review your ethics compliance in the meantime." That got his attention. "Excuse me?" She didn't repeat herself. She simply walked toward the glass doors, heels clicking with unhurried rhythm. Each step carried the authority of someone who'd already decided what the outcome would be. When the doors closed behind her, Richard finally muttered, "Arrogant woman." One of his investors leaned forward. "You realize she owns 70% of Novasphere, right? If she walks, there's no deal." Richard waved him off. "She'll come around. They always do." But even he didn't sound convinced. Across town, Selena sat in the back of her car, city lights reflecting off the window. Her assistant handed her a tablet showing a breaking headline. "Everhart Industries faces criticism for diversity remarks." The clip from that morning's meeting, recorded by a journalist present for background observation, had already surfaced online. Selena watched it once, her face unreadable, then locked the screen. "Let them talk," she said quietly. "They haven't seen anything yet." Her driver glanced in the mirror. "Back to headquarters, ma'am?" "No," she said, "to the investor summit." Because in her world, silence wasn't retreat, it was preparation. And by the time Richard realized that, his boardroom would no longer be his kingdom. The invitation arrived embossed in gold, the kind of card that assumed you'd say yes. "Private Investor Dinner," it read, hosted by Richard Everhart himself at the Monarch Club in Manhattan. The message beneath it was clear, an event for visionaries and legacy builders. Selena accepted without hesitation. If Richard wanted to parade her success to impress his circle, she'd let him. Sometimes, letting arrogance perform was the best way to see where it would stumble. The Monarch Club was a cathedral of excess. Red velvet drapes, oil paintings of men whose fortunes were older than equality itself. Waiters moved like shadows in crisp black suits, their trays lined with gold-rimmed glasses. The air smelled of aged wine and entitlement. Richard stood near the grand fireplace, already holding court. He saw Selina enter and smiled, too wide, too rehearsed. "Ah, the star of the evening," he announced, loud enough for the chandeliers to echo it. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Dr. Selina Brooks, the woman reinventing energy itself." Applause followed, polite, clipped, and insincere. Every smile in that room looked painted on. As she took her seat, Selina noticed she was the only black face among 24 guests. The servers were darker, but no one looked at them unless snapping fingers for refills. Dinner began with a toast. Crystal chimed, laughter flowed, and Richard raised his glass. "To heritage," he said, "and to those who keep the old world alive while lighting the new." The guests echoed him in harmony, their heritage meaning one thing to them and something entirely different to her. Across the table, a woman in pearls leaned toward her companion. "She's lovely," she whispered, loud enough for Selina to hear. "Do you think her firm was crowdfunded?" Her friend laughed softly. "Probably a diversity grant. They have those now, don't they?" Selina didn't respond. She sliced through her salmon with slow precision, her silence louder than any retort. Another man chimed in, swirling his glass. "Richard, I must say, your guest is a breath of fresh air. We don't often see new money so refined," Richard chuckled. "Novosphere has potential. I like helping people polish their brands, makes them marketable." A ripple of laughter followed, brittle and sharp. Selina felt it. Not the sting of insult, but the quiet, familiar fatigue of being forced to prove she belonged in rooms that borrowed her brilliance, but never offered her belonging. She set down her fork and looked directly at Richard. "You assume I came here to be polished," she said softly. "But you might be mistaken. I came here to see if this table still understands innovation, or if it's just a museum of entitlement." The laughter stopped. Forks paused midair. Richard smiled tightly. "You've got spirit, Selina. I like that. Just remember, charm is as important as intellect when you're dealing with legacy investors." Her eyes didn't move from his. "Charm has built very little compared to intellect, but I understand, in some worlds, arrogance is mistaken for charm." His expression flickered. The woman in pearls took a sip of water, pretending not to listen. The pianist in the corner seemed to sense the shift and softened the notes. The rest of the dinner passed with forced politeness, a performance of civility layered over quiet tension. When the plates were cleared and dessert offered, Selina stood. "Leaving so soon?" Richard asked. "The evening's just begun." "I've heard enough," she replied. "Some tables feed you with food, others try to feed on your dignity." He tried to laugh it off. "Come now, don't take us so seriously. This is how we talk business." She looked at him one last time. "No, Richard, this is how you talk down, and I don't do business with men who mistake mockery for mentorship." Gasps flickered around the room, a few guests pretending sudden fascination with their plates. Selina turned to the maitre d', who rushed to open the door for her. As she stepped into the marble corridor, her heels echoing softly, she paused and looked back at him. Her voice was calm, measured, but it cut through the hush like a blade. "You can tell Mr. Everhart," she said to the maitre d', "that the next time he needs entertainment, he should book a clown, not a partner." She left the Monarch Club without looking back. Inside, Richard stood frozen, the weight of laughter gone from his lips. Around him, his circle of power avoided his eyes. The toast to heritage had soured into silence. And outside, under the cold Manhattan night, Selina exhaled, not out of anger, but resolve. Because she knew that humiliation in rooms like that wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a reckoning. By morning, the Monarch Club's golden reputation was dimmed by something brighter. Outrage. A grainy, 10-second clip began circulating on social media before sunrise. It showed Richard Everhart laughing at the dinner table, wineglass raised, as he leaned toward another guest and said, "We'll clean up her startup image, give it a real face of leadership." The words hit harder than he ever intended. It wasn't just what he said, but how he said it. Through the smirk of a man convinced he could own someone else's creation. Within hours, the clip spread like wildfire. Hashtags multiplied. Tashed real face of leadership. Everhart exposed. Novosphere deserves better. News anchors replayed the footage between stock updates. Commentators dissected every frames, every laugh, every glance exchanged across that table. The internet had seen enough arrogance dressed as progress, and this time it had receipts. At Everhart Industries, panic hummed beneath polished silence. Executives flooded Richard's office with suggestions: draft an apology, issue a press release, blame editing. Richard brushed them all aside. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down on the city as if it were still his to command. "It's nothing," he said, voice casual. "People overreact. This'll be forgotten by Monday." His head of PR hesitated. "Sir, the clip's on every major outlet, CNBC, Forbes, the Journal." "I said it's banter," he interrupted. "We'll spin it that way. Schedule me an interview for noon." By midday, Richard appeared live on CNBC, perfectly composed in his tailored suit. His grin was controlled, his tone confident. "It was a private dinner," he said smoothly. "Some friendly teasing. We all know Dr. Brooks is brilliant. If anything, I was complimenting her ambition. Let's not lose our sense of humor in business." The host smiled awkwardly, unsure whether to challenge him. But online, the world was already answering. The clip played side by side with his interview. His words didn't soften the blow, they sharpened it. Viewers heard the mockery clearly, watched the smirks of the guests, and understood. This wasn't humor. It was hierarchy. Novosphere headquarters, by contrast, was calm. No press statements, no rebuttals, just quiet work and steady focus. Reporters camped outside the building, hoping for comment. They got none. Behind closed doors, Selena sat in her minimalist office overlooking the bay. Her communications director, Aisha, stood by the glass table, anxious. "We could release a statement," she said. "Condemn the remarks, set the record straight before it escalates." Selena shook her head. "No." Aisha frowned. "But the silence might look like—" "Let truth ferment," Selena said. "When arrogance exposes itself, the worst thing you can do is interrupt." She tapped her pen against the table once. "They want me emotional. They want me reactive. But I didn't build Novosphere on reaction. I built it on patience." Outside, the city roared with opinion. Analysts speculated whether the merger would collapse. Journalists demanded comment from both sides. Every major network framed it as the face of modern prejudice in corporate America. By evening, the clip had been viewed 40 million times. Employees began removing Everhart Industries from their LinkedIn profiles. A major investor tweeted that leadership no longer reflected the company's values. The board scheduled an emergency meeting for the following morning. Richard, still dismissive, poured himself another drink at his penthouse suite. "They'll move on," he muttered to his reflection. "They always do." But even as he said it, the screens around him told another story. His own company's stock had started to dip. Slow at first, then steady. A headline flashed across the ticker. Everhart CEO faces backlash after racist remarks. Partners reconsider deal. Miles away, Selena stood on her balcony watching the fog roll across the bay. Her phone buzzed non-stop with calls she didn't answer. She didn't need to. The world was doing the talking for her. She turned to Aisha and said quietly, "Every storm needs a center. We'll be the calm." Aisha nodded, finally understanding. Because Selena knew something Richard never did. That silence, when chosen, isn't weakness. It's precision. And by morning, his laughter would echo through a very different kind of room, one that no longer applauded him. 3 days later, the world waited outside the Frost & Co. conference hall in Midtown Manhattan. Reporters lined the marble entrance like soldiers awaiting battle. Cameras clicked, microphones jutted forward, and the words "Merger Signing Day" glowed on every digital screen. Inside, executives from both companies sat behind long oak tables polished to a mirror sheen. Every glass of water had been refilled, every folder aligned, every seat placed with precision. The room smelled faintly of paper, ink, and the expectation that money would silence controversy, as it always had. Richard Everhart entered last, trailed by his lawyers and a PR handler who looked like she hadn't slept in days. His smirk was still there, though thinner now. He straightened his tie and whispered to one of his aides, "We'll wrap this up, smile for the cameras, and the internet will find a new toy by Friday." When he spotted Selena across the room, he slowed. She sat poised, wearing a dark navy suit with a soft gold pin shaped like a sunburst, the symbol of Novosphere. Her calm was unsettling. Her team sat beside her, hands folded, faces unreadable. "Dr. Brooks," Richard greeted, voice dripping with false warmth. "I appreciate you still coming. Shows class." She looked at him but didn't stand. "I came because integrity still means something, even when others forget what it looks like." He extended his hand. The photographers leaned forward, waiting for the handshake that would restore order. But Selena didn't move. Her gaze flicked briefly toward his hand, then to the folder she was about to open. The silence stretched long enough for every camera shutter to fall quiet. Richard withdrew his hand awkwardly, clearing his throat. "Shall we?" Selena nodded once and slid a thick folder across the table toward him. "Before we proceed with any signatures, there's something you should see." He frowned, flipping it open casually, and then froze. Inside were documents, time-stamped emails, and data logs with Everhart Industries letterhead. Each page traced unauthorized access to Novasphere's prototype grid designs, taken 2 years earlier under the guise of joint research. For a moment, no one breathed. Richard's general counsel leaned over his shoulder, eyes scanning the first few lines before going pale. "Sir, this isn't." "It's fabricated," Richard cut in quickly. "This is ridiculous. We don't steal." Selena's voice didn't rise. "The timestamps are confirmed by third-party verification. The metadata traces back to your East Coast R&D subsidiary. You didn't just steal files, you used them in your own infrastructure tests 6 months before our first meeting." He opened his mouth to argue, but the color had drained from his face. Across the room, one of his attorneys began whispering to another, the word lawsuit surfacing like a ghost. Selena continued, her tone controlled, every syllable sharpened by restraint. "I wasn't going to bring this up here, but then your interview aired. You said my company needed a real face of leadership." She paused. "Consider this my reply." Richard slammed the folder shut, forcing a laugh that sounded more like panic. "You're bluffing. You'd never risk a scandal. You need this deal more than we do." She met his stare. "I built my company from nothing. You built yours from theft. We're not the same." His PR handler shifted uncomfortably, whispering, "Mr. Everhart, the cameras are still outside. If this leaks—" "It won't leak," he snapped, but he knew it already had. Selena rose from her chair, gathering her pen and tablet. "This was supposed to be a partnership," she said quietly. "But partnerships require respect, and respect isn't negotiable." Richard leaned forward, voice dropping. "You think walking away hurts me? The market will crush you the minute I withdraw my investors." She tilted her head slightly. "Maybe. Or maybe the market's finally tired of arrogance disguised as leadership." She turned to her assistant. "Prepare the filings." Richard blinked. "Filings?" She looked back at him, her calm almost unnerving. "We're not merging," she said. "We're filing." The words landed like a verdict. Every lawyer in the room stopped moving. Pens hovered in midair. Even the soundproof walls couldn't contain the shift in air pressure. The collective realization that everything had just changed. Richard tried to stand, but his knees wobbled. "You'll regret this," he hissed. Selena picked up the folder and tucked it under her arm. "You said that to every woman you underestimated. Tell me, how many of them proved you wrong?" She walked past him without another word. Outside, the cameras snapped to life again, capturing her exit. She didn't pause for the press or offer a statement. Behind her, through the glass doors, Richard's reflection stared back at itself. Smaller now, shaken, and for the first time, uncertain. Because power rarely expects accountability to dress in evidence, and Selena Brooks had just brought a mirror to the boardroom. By sunrise, the world had turned on its axis. Every major business outlet carried the same headline in bold. Everhart Industries under investigation. Data theft allegations surface. What began as whispers in investor chat rooms erupted into global panic by noon. Everhart's stock price, once the pride of Wall Street, plummeted 42% in a single trading day. Screens across trading floors bled red. Analysts shouted, phones rang non-stop, and traders cursed under their breath as numbers fell faster than they could calculate. Meanwhile, Novasphere Energy, quiet, steady, and unbothered, was climbing. Its valuation jumped by $19 billion overnight. The market had chosen its side. Inside Everhart Tower, chaos had replaced confidence. Executives huddled behind glass walls, whispering damage control strategies that dissolved faster than they were spoken. The once pristine boardroom, where Richard had mocked Selena, now looked like a battlefield. Papers strewn across the table, laptops flashing error messages, coffee cups abandoned mid-crisis. Richard stormed into the room, slamming a copy of the Financial Journal onto the table. The front page displayed his face beside the headline, "Everhart CEO accused of corporate exploitation." "This is media hysteria," he barked. "They'll spin anything for clicks." His CFO adjusted his glasses nervously. "Sir, it's not just media. The SEC has requested records." And he hesitated. "The Senate Oversight Committee just announced a formal inquiry into your data practices." Richard froze, disbelief etched into his features. "An inquiry? Over what? A few recycled files?" Another voice, quieter but firmer, replied, "Over stolen technology, sir. There's a difference." For the first time in his career, Richard didn't have a comeback. His mind spun through exit plans, excuses, scapegoats, anything but accountability. Across the city, the tone was different. Selena's headquarters felt like calm after a storm. No cheers, no gloating, just quiet satisfaction. Screens displayed upward trending charts, while analysts confirmed Novosphere had become the new benchmark in clean tech innovation. Her communications director approached, tablet in hand. "The networks want interviews. CNN, Bloomberg, BBC, they all want your statement." Selena looked up from her desk, eyes steady. "Tell them I'm not here to celebrate someone else's downfall. I'm here to redefine leadership." She returned to her work, sketching a new initiative on a notepad. "Integrity," she said softly, "shouldn't need a crisis to trend." By afternoon, leaked emails hit the press. Internal memos proving Everhart executives had discussed borrowing Novosphere's data long before negotiations began. In one email, Richard himself had written, "If we can access their model early, we'll control the narrative." That sentence became the nail in his empire's coffin. Cable news anchors who once praised Richard's charisma now spoke with rehearsed outrage. Commentators replayed the clip of him mocking Selena at the Monarch Club, now framed as the moment arrogance met its reckoning. On social media, one quote from Selena's past interview began circulating again, a quiet statement she'd given years ago. "True leadership doesn't need validation, it leaves proof." The phrase became a rallying cry across platforms. Employees of major corporations began tagging their posts with "proof not privilege." Meanwhile, Richard's PR team scrambled to contain the collapse. "Issue a statement," one advisor pleaded. "Apologize, show humility." But Richard refused. "Apologizing implies guilt. We're victims of exaggeration." "Sir," the advisor said carefully, "at this point, denial is guilt." Outside, protesters gathered in front of Everhart Tower, holding signs that read, "Accountability is leadership," and "Justice for stolen innovation." The empire built on ego had crumbled, not through sabotage but self-inflicted blindness. By week's end, the once untouchable Everhart Industries was suspended from trading, its board forced into emergency restructuring. Richard's portrait was removed from the corporate lobby. And across the bay, Novosphere prepared for something greater. Not revenge, but reform. Because while arrogance collapses overnight, dignity compounds. And Selena Brooks had just proven which currency would outlast them all. In the weeks that followed, Richard Everhart's empire began to rot from the inside out. It didn't happen in an explosion, it happened in echoes. One board member resigned quietly, then another. By the end of the month, half of his directors had stepped down, citing irreconcilable ethical differences. Investors pulled their capital like blood draining from a dying body. The press called it the Great Unraveling, but the truth was simpler. Arrogance had outlived its protection. Once, Richard couldn't walk a block in New York without someone trying to shake his hand. Now, doors that once opened at his arrival stayed locked. Calls went unanswered. The people who had once built their careers orbiting his influence now treated him like a contagion. Contracts disappeared overnight. A major government deal worth $2.8 billion was revoked. Longtime partners issued statements condemning his poor judgment. Charity boards removed his name from sponsorship plaques, citing brand alignment concerns. In the silence of his penthouse office, Richard sat surrounded by boxes. The Everhart nameplate had been taken down from the entrance hall. Only the faint shadow of it remained on the wall, like the ghost of a title no longer deserved. He stared at the skyline, the same view that used to remind him of control. Now, it only reminded him of how quickly power fades when built on exclusion. His assistant entered softly, placing an envelope on his desk. "It's from your daughter, sir." He frowned, tearing it open. Inside was a single printed statement, a social media post that had already gone viral. It read, "My father forgot what leadership meant. Leadership is not domination, it's responsibility. To those he's hurt, I'm sorry. The name Everhart will mean something different in my hands." She'd signed it Ava Everhart, founder, Equaltech Foundation. For the first time in his life, Richard felt something he couldn't control. Shame. It wasn't loud or cinematic. It sat in his chest, heavy and unfamiliar. He turned on the television out of habit. A reporter was interviewing a group of young engineers in Chicago, the inaugural recipients of the Selena Brooks Innovation Grant. Their faces were full of possibility, voices steady with gratitude. Selena had taken the funds she once intended for the merger and redirected them towards scholarships and community innovation hubs across the country. She wasn't destroying what he'd built. She was rebuilding what he'd ignored. A commentator's voice filled the room. Dr. Brooks' initiative is expected to open pathways for hundreds of minority engineers who've historically been locked out of the tech industry. Her quiet act of redirection has become a global movement. Richard muted the TV. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful, it was judgmental. Every headline, every missed call, every echo of his daughter's words reminded him that this wasn't a business failure. It was a moral one. The fall wasn't sudden, it was deliberate, a collapse paced by accountability. The last company press release bearing his signature went out the following week. Effective immediately, Richard Everhart has resigned as CEO. The news ticker didn't stop for him. It simply moved on. Meanwhile, in San Francisco, Selena stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony of the first Novosphere Community Lab, a state-of-the-art center dedicated to renewable energy education. Cameras clicked, children from local schools toured the facility, and a journalist asked her if she felt vindicated by Richard's downfall. She smiled gently. "Revenge wastes energy," she said. "Redirection builds it." The reporter pressed further. "So this isn't about payback?" Selena shook her head. "No, it's about proving that dignity is more powerful than dominance." The crowd applauded. Somewhere in that moment, the narrative shifted permanently, from humiliation to hope, from exclusion to empowerment. Some storms don't roar, they reallocate lightning and light up new skies for those who were never supposed to rise. The studio lights were soft but unrelenting. The air felt weighted, not with tension, but with truth long overdue. Across from the interviewer sat Dr. Selena Brooks, the woman the world had been waiting to hear from. 3 weeks had passed since the scandal that swallowed Everhart Industries whole, and for the first time, she had agreed to speak publicly. The network promoted it as the interview that changed corporate America. Ratings were already breaking records before she even walked on set. The interviewer leaned forward. "Dr. Brooks, you've remained silent through weeks of headlines, lawsuits, and congressional hearings. Why now?" Selena adjusted the microphone clipped to her blazer. Her expression was steady, voice calm, because silence served its purpose. "I wanted the truth to speak for itself first. My words now aren't to defend myself, they're to define what comes next." He nodded. "Can you tell us what happened that night at the Monarch Club?" She paused briefly, then began. There was laughter, there were jokes about legacy and bloodlines, and there were questions about how a black woman could possibly lead a multi-billion-dollar firm without inheriting it from someone else. Her tone didn't waver. It wasn't anger, it was recollection. They thought they were mocking me, but they were exposing themselves. The audience in the studio fell silent. The interviewer hesitated, glancing at his notes before asking, "Did you feel humiliated?" "No," Selena replied softly. "Humiliation requires accepting someone else's definition of you. I never did. What I felt was clarity." The screen behind them displayed images from that dinner, the leaked video, the headlines, the protests outside Everhart Tower. The interviewer continued, "You turned down the merger, then filed a lawsuit that led to the downfall of one of the largest corporations in America. Was this revenge?" Selena shook her head. "Revenge is emotional. What I did was structural. Racism at the top isn't ignorance, it's policy wearing perfume. I just stopped signing the check that funded it." Her words landed like a thunderclap wrapped in reason. The interviewer blinked, visibly moved. "So what message do you hope corporate America takes from this?" "That progress isn't a press release," she said. "It's accountability. Companies love to talk about diversity as if it's charity, but inclusion without respect is just decor with better optics. You can't fix culture until you stop worshiping the people who break it. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of her words filled the space between them. Then the interviewer leaned back and smiled faintly. You know, some say you've inspired a corporate reckoning. Selena exhaled softly. If I've done anything, it's remind people that power doesn't belong to those who hoard it. It belongs to those who question it. The segment ended there, but the moment didn't. Within hours, the clip had gone viral. CEOs who had once spoken Richard's name in admiration now issued sudden statements on ethical reform. HR departments scrambled to review their inclusivity policies. Boards across the country convened emergency meetings, not because they wanted to, but because silence had become expensive. The 60 Minutes interview became one of the most viewed broadcasts in business history. Excerpts of her quotes were printed on magazine covers, replayed at leadership summits, and taught in graduate business programs as the turning point where integrity became strategy. And as the world watched her final words fade to black, the reflection lingered. She hadn't raised her voice, she had raised standards. Sometimes change doesn't march. It sits in a chair, looks the system in the eye, and speaks truth so steady, even arrogance can't talk over it. The email arrived under an unfamiliar subject line, request for a private meeting. It came from a personal address, not a corporate one. Stripped of signatures, logos, or the arrogance that once clung to every message Richard Everhart sent. Selena read it once, then again. There was no pitch, no pretense, just 7 words that told her everything had changed. I owe you an apology, in person. She agreed to meet, not out of curiosity, but closure. 3 months later, they sat in a quiet corner of a small cafe overlooking the Hudson. No cameras, no press, just 2 people, one rebuilding, the other trying to remember who he used to be before his own downfall defined him. Richard arrived late, though not fashionably so. He wore a plain gray suit, the kind that didn't announce wealth or status. His posture was smaller now, his shoulders slumped beneath the weight of consequence. He carried no assistant, no entourage, only a folder and an awkward silence that followed him to her table. "Dr. Brooks," he said softly, almost tentative. "Thank you for meeting me." She nodded once, offering no small talk. "You said you wanted to apologize." He sat down slowly, as if the chair itself judged him. "I was wrong," he said. "About you, about the company, about everything." His voice cracked slightly, unused to honesty. "I thought legacy made me untouchable. I thought I could say anything, take anything, and the world would look the other way because I was Richard Everhart." Selena studied him in silence. His eyes, once sharp with entitlement, now looked tired, not from age, but from accountability. "I lost everything," he continued, forcing a faint, bitter laugh. "The board, the house, my reputation, my daughter doesn't even speak to me." Selena's tone was calm, almost gentle. "You didn't lose them, Richard. You traded them. For comfort." He looked up confused. "What do you mean?" "You weren't wrong," she said softly. "You were comfortable. You believed the system worked because it worked for you. You mistook access for intelligence and privilege for power. The problem wasn't blindness. It was contentment." The words landed quietly but completely. He stared at his folded hands, realizing that no scandal, no investigation had ever cut deeper than that truth. He swallowed hard. "I don't expect forgiveness." She leaned back. "Forgiveness isn't a gift for the guilty. It's a release for the tired." He blinked, unsure whether she was offering him mercy or something far colder. She glanced toward the window. Outside, the city was alive, cabs honking, people rushing, the same world that had once crowned him untouchable, now humming without his permission. Richard shifted in his seat. "You were right, you know," he said. "About legacy. I spent my life building one, only to realize it was a cage made of my own pride." Selena smiled faintly. "The difference between us, Richard, is that I built mine to open doors. You built yours to keep others out." He exhaled shakily. "I deserve everything that happened." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Yes." The honesty startled him more than cruelty ever could. Selena gathered her bag and stood. "I don't hate you," she said, "but I won't sit at the same table again. You mistook my silence once. Don't mistake it now." She turned and walked toward the door, the sound of her heels quiet but final. Richard didn't follow. He couldn't. He stayed seated, staring at the half-empty coffee cup between them, realizing it was the closest thing to closure he would ever get. As the door closed behind her, the reflection of the city lights shimmered across the table, and for the first time, Richard Everhart understood that power was never meant to be possessed. The morning light spilled across the San Francisco Bay, washing the skyline in gold. The new Novosphere headquarters shimmered in the distance, a cathedral of glass and solar panels reflecting the dawn. The building didn't just harness light, it symbolized it. What began as an idea dismissed in boardrooms now powered entire communities. Inside, the hum of quiet work filled the air. Engineers, interns, innovators moved through open spaces lined with plants and soft natural light. Every corridor displayed a quote etched in silver: "Integrity is renewable." It wasn't branding, it was reminder. Selena stood by the window, watching the city stir awake. Months had passed since the scandal that reshaped Wall Street, but her calm remained unchanged. In the silence, she remembered the laughter at the Monarch Club, the smirks in the boardroom, the hand she didn't shake. He mocked her name and lost an empire. She kept her dignity and powered a generation. The poetic symmetry of it all wasn't revenge, it was revelation. The world had witnessed what happened when prejudice disguised itself as leadership, and when grace met it with truth instead of fury. Across the bay, the shell of Everhart Tower still stood, but its lights were dimmed. The company had been restructured, its name changed, its influence diluted. What had once been a monument to arrogance now served as a cautionary tale, proof that legacy without conscience was nothing more than a house built on fog. Selena turned back to her desk, where a letter from a high school student sat unopened. The handwriting was shaky, hopeful. It read, "Thank you for proving that people who look like me can lead without permission." She smiled faintly, sliding the letter into a drawer already full of similar ones. That was the quiet reward, knowing she had built something that outlived applause. Racism bankrupts more than balance sheets. It bankrupts legacy. Empires fall not from loss of profit, but from loss of principle. And dignity, that quiet, steady currency, never devalues. As the sun climbed higher, its reflection danced across the panels outside, scattering gold across the bay. The light didn't belong to one person, one company, or one name. It belonged to everyone willing to stand under it. The scene faded slowly, replaced by a simple message. If you were Dr. Selena Brooks, would you forgive or fight? Have you ever been underestimated because of who you are? What's the worst insult you've turned into strength? Do you believe humility can be more powerful than revenge? Share your thoughts below. Your story might be the next echo someone needs to hear. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe to Echoes of Hope Stories HQ, because silence should never be the end of any story. Sometimes justice doesn't shout. Sometimes it stands tall in the morning light, proof that no empire built on bias will ever outshine truth.